Right now, a nation is on fire, and the entire world is watching. Protests are sweeping across Iran, a massive nationwide uprising against a regime that's been in power for decades. But what we're seeing, it's not just another political protest. It's a desperate cry from a people who have been pushed to the absolute edge. So let's get into what's really driving this moment.
The human cost is just staggering. According to human rights groups, clashes with security forces have already left more than 500 protesters dead. And you have to remember, that number is almost certainly an undercount. Getting reliable information out of the country right now is next to impossible. And here's exactly why. The government has slammed the door shut with a near-total internet blackout. Now, on one hand, they're trying to stop protesters from coordinating with each other, but they're also trying to hide the true scale of their brutal crackdown from the rest of us. Despite that, some horrific videos are still managing to leak out. So what is actually happening in Iran? Are we watching the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic, or is this just another tragic chapter in a long, painful history of crushed rebellions? In this explainer, we're going to break down the powerful forces that have brought Iran to this incredibly dangerous tipping point.
Okay, first things first. We need to understand that this explosion of anger didn't just come out of nowhere. Not at all. It's the result of decades of simmering frustration that has finally boiled over into a nationwide firestorm.
The scene on the ground is pure chaos. We're talking mass arrests, widespread arson, and get this, the government itself is admitting to losing over 100 of its own security officers. Now, even if that's partly inflated, it tells you just how intense these clashes are. And this isn't just happening in the big cities anymore. The protests have spread deep into rural Iran. The regime's response to all this? To label its own citizens urban terrorists.
But look, to really understand why this is all kicking off right now, we have to look past the politics and get to the real core trigger, a catastrophic economic collapse that has made daily life completely unbearable for millions.
You can't ignore the economic crisis. For nearly a decade, Iranians have been battling this crippling inflation, sometimes spiking as high as 70%. Now, to put that into perspective, a healthy economy usually aims for, 2 to 4% inflation. Just try to imagine your cost of living rising that fast year after year. Survival itself becomes a daily struggle.
And then, this happened. The currency went into an absolute free fall. At its worst, a single US dollar was worth 1.4 million Iranian rials. That was it. That was the final straw. People's entire life savings were wiped out practically overnight. This is the moment when desperation turned into pure rage and sent millions of people pouring into the streets.
And this is so crucial, where this whole thing began. It wasn't on a university campus. It wasn't started by political activists. It started with shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the economic heartbeat of the entire country. This place connects every single social class, from the poorest workers to the wealthiest elites. And here's the kicker. The 1979 revolution, it started here too. So when the bazaar shut its doors, it sent a powerful signal that the entire social contract was broken.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we need to zoom out a bit and look at the history. Because for many Iranians, their story for the last century has been a painful struggle against what they see as two villains, one at home and one from abroad.
You can see this tragic cycle of popular movements and brutal suppression playing out for decades. Back in 1953, a CIA-backed coup toppled Iran's democratic government, all to protect Western oil interests. Well, that directly led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which got rid of the US-backed Shah, but installed a repressive religious dictatorship in his place. Since then, you had the Green Movement in 2009, the Masa Amini protests in 2022. Both were violently crushed. Today's uprising is just the latest and perhaps most explosive chapter in this long struggle. And this brings us to the people's dilemma. They are well and truly caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, you've got their own repressive regime, a dictatorship responsible for horrific human rights abuses and just disastrous economic mismanagement. But on the other side, they have this deep-seated distrust of any foreign intervention. Thanks to the history of that '53 coup, the crippling sanctions that always hurt ordinary people the most, and the constant threats of military action. They feel trapped between two forces they absolutely despise. Okay, so you might be thinking, the regime has crushed protests before. Why should this time be any different? Well, that is the key question, and there are several huge factors that suggest this really could be a genuine tipping point. So, there are 4 big reasons. First, these protests are about survival, plain and simple. When people are literally fighting for food on the table, they are much harder to scare off the streets. Second, like we saw with the Bazaar strike, this movement has an incredibly broad base of support. It unites all social classes. Third, the regime itself is looking weaker than it has in a long time. Recent military setbacks and embarrassing attacks on its nuclear facilities have really damaged that old image of invincibility. And finally, and this is maybe the most important part, the government has no easy fix. They can't just make some small political concession to make this go away. There's no magic wand you can wave to fix hyperinflation and a totally collapsed currency. They're cornered.
So all of this leads Iran to an incredibly dangerous crossroads. The future is completely unwritten, but it seems like every possible path forward is filled with immense risk for the Iranian people.
This quote just perfectly captures the terrifying dynamic that's playing out. The stronger the people's movement gets, the more vicious and brutal the regime's crackdown becomes. We're hearing threats of the death penalty for protesters. Over 10,000 people have reportedly already been arrested. It's just a horrifying cycle of escalating violence.
And then, of course, there's the international wildcard. Powers like the US and Israel, they see an opportunity here. The American president is openly talking about military options. But the real fear for so many Iranians is that foreign intervention won't bring them freedom. They are terrified that if some third player jumps into the fight, their revolution, a revolution for dignity and a better life, will get hijacked and turned into just another grubby scramble for their country's resources.
Which leaves us with this final, haunting question. The people of Iran are fighting for their lives against a brutal dictatorship. But will they be allowed to achieve a true revolution, one from within? Or will their struggle be co-opted, leaving them with just a new master from without? The stakes, for them and for the world, could not possibly be higher.